Sometimes the most loyal witnesses to tragedy are the ones who can't speak. But when they finally get the chance to tell their story, the truth they reveal can be more powerful than any human testimony. What I'm about to tell you is the extraordinary story of Max, a German shepherd who disappeared with his owners in the Colorado wilderness 12 years ago, and how his miraculous return would finally solve one of the state's most baffling missing persons cases. It began as the perfect weekend getaway for adventure. Jake and Amy Morrison were the kind of couple that other people envied. Both 28 years old, they had met while rock climbing in Boulder and had built their relationship around a shared love of the outdoors. Jake was a software engineer who spent his weekdays in front of computer screens but came alive on mountain trails. Amy worked as a park ranger for the Colorado State Park System and knew the wilderness like most people knew their own neighborhoods. Their constant companion on every adventure was Max, a 3-year-old German shepherd they had rescued from a shelter 2 years earlier. Max was more than just a pet, he was a trained search and rescue dog who had already helped locate several missing hikers in the Colorado Rockies. He was intelligent, loyal, and had an almost supernatural ability to navigate difficult terrain. Max isn't just our dog, Amy would tell friends. He's our partner. We trust him with our lives, and he's never let us down. On October 8, 2011, the Morrisons set out for what was supposed to be a 3-day backpacking trip in the remote Sangre de Cristo Mountains, about 4 hours south of Denver. They were experienced hikers who had done this particular route several times before, but this trip was special. It was their way of celebrating their second wedding anniversary. They had planned a 25-mile loop trail that would take them through some of Colorado's most spectacular wilderness areas. The route included alpine lakes, high mountain passes, and camping spots that offered views that few people ever experienced. It was challenging hiking, but well within their capabilities. Jake and Amy left detailed plans with Amy's supervisor at the Park Service, including their exact route, camping locations, and expected return date of October 11th. They carried GPS devices, satellite communication equipment, and enough food and water for 5 days, more than enough for their planned 3-day trip. Most importantly, they had Max, whose wilderness experience and protective instincts made him better than any security system. The first 2 days of their hike went exactly as planned. Jake's GPS device showed they were making good time and following their intended route. On October 9th, they sent a brief satellite message to Amy's parents, "Day 2 going great. Weather perfect. Max caught a rabbit, and let it go. See you Monday." It was the last communication anyone would receive from Jake and Amy Morrison. When they failed to return on October 11th as scheduled, Amy's supervisor at the Park Service immediately initiated search and rescue protocols. A team was dispatched to their last known location within hours, and by the next morning, one of the largest search operations in Colorado history was underway. The search involved over 200 volunteers, multiple helicopters, ground teams with dogs, and technical rescue specialists who could access the most difficult terrain in the mountains. They followed Jake and Amy's planned route meticulously, checking every campsite, every trail junction, and every possible deviation from their path. What they found was deeply puzzling. At their planned second-night campsite near Crystal Lake, searchers discovered clear evidence that Jake and Amy had been there. Their tent had been set up properly, a fire ring showed recent use, and food containers indicated they had eaten dinner. But there were also signs that something had gone wrong. The campsite appeared to have been abandoned suddenly. Personal items were scattered around the area, as if the couple had left quickly without taking time to pack properly. Most mysteriously, there were no tracks leading away from the campsite, not human tracks, and not dog tracks. It was like they just vanished into thin air, said Chief Ranger Tom Rodriguez, who led the search operation. We found where they'd been, but no indication of where they'd gone. The search continued for 3 weeks, covering over 500 square miles of wilderness. They found Jake's GPS device smashed against some rocks about a mile from the campsite, but there was no other trace of the couple or their dog. Weather conditions during the search were excellent, and the area where they disappeared wasn't particularly dangerous for experienced hikers. There were no cliffs they could have fallen from, no rivers they could have drowned in, and no avalanche danger at that time of year. The official investigation considered several possibilities. Wild animal attack was ruled out. There were no signs of struggle and no blood at the campsite. Getting lost was unlikely given their experience and the fact that they knew this area well. Equipment failure couldn't explain the sudden abandonment of their campsite. As months turned to years, the disappearance of Jake and Amy Morrison became one of Colorado's most famous unsolved cases. Their families never stopped hoping for answers, but as time passed, it seemed increasingly likely that the truth would never be known. Until March 15, 2023. Officer Sarah Chen of the Alamosa Police Department was responding to a routine call about a stray dog that had been spotted near the town's outskirts. The caller, an elderly rancher named Bill Martinez, reported that the dog appeared to be in poor condition but seemed friendly and might be someone's lost pet. When Officer Chen arrived at Martinez's ranch, she found a German Shepherd that was clearly malnourished and showing signs of having lived in the wild for an extended period. The dog's fur was matted and dirty, his paws were worn from years of walking on rough terrain, and he had several scars that suggested encounters with wildlife. But despite his rough appearance, the dog was remarkably calm and responsive to human contact. He came right up to me, Officer Chen later recalled. Most feral dogs are skittish around strangers, but this one acted like he'd been waiting for someone to find him. The dog was wearing a collar, though it was so weathered and faded that any identification tags were unreadable. Officer Chen brought him to the local animal shelter, where veterinarian Dr. Lisa Park examined him and made a startling discovery. "This dog has a microchip," Dr. Park announced after scanning the animal. "And according to the registration database, his name is Max, and he belongs to Jake and Amy Morrison of Boulder." Officer Chen immediately recognized the names from the famous missing persons case she had studied during her police training. She contacted the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and within hours, investigators were on their way to Alamosa. Agent Michael Rodriguez, no relation to the former chief ranger, was a specialist in cold cases who had been following the Morrison disappearance for years. When he saw Max, now 12 years older than when he'd vanished with his owners, he knew they were looking at potentially the most important witness in the case. Dogs don't just survive 12 years in the wilderness by accident, Agent Rodriguez explained. This dog knows something about what happened to his owners, and we need to find a way for him to show us. The decision was made to bring Max back to the area where Jake and Amy had disappeared, in hopes that he might lead investigators to clues that had been missed during the original search. What happened next would change everything. When the search team brought Max to the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, his behavior immediately indicated that he remembered the area. But instead of leading them to the Crystal Lake campsite where his owners had last been seen, Max took them in a completely different direction. For 3 hours, Max led the team through difficult terrain, following what appeared to be animal trails and paths that weren't marked on any map. He moved with purpose and determination, occasionally stopping to check that the humans were following him. He knew exactly where he was going, said K-9 handler Detective Maria Santos, who accompanied the expedition. This wasn't random wandering. He had a destination in mind. Finally, Max led the team to a remote canyon that was nearly 3 miles from the original campsite and completely off Jake and Amy's planned hiking route. The canyon was hidden from aerial view and would have been easily missed by ground searchers unless they knew exactly where to look. At the bottom of the canyon, partially concealed by 12 years of fallen leaves and debris, investigators made a discovery that would finally solve the mystery of what happened to Jake and Amy Morrison. They found human remains, camping equipment, and personal belongings that clearly belonged to the missing couple. But the location and condition of the evidence told a story that no one had anticipated. Jake and Amy Morrison hadn't died in a hiking accident or gotten lost in the wilderness. They had been murdered. The forensic evidence painted a clear picture of what had happened in October 2011. Jake and Amy had encountered someone else in the wilderness, someone who had forced them to leave their campsite and hike to this remote canyon. The scattered condition of their belongings and the positioning of the remains indicated a violent confrontation. Most importantly, investigators found evidence that explained how Max had survived all these years. Near the remains, they discovered a crude shelter that had clearly been used as a long-term survival camp. Max had stayed with his owners' bodies, protecting them and surviving in the wilderness for over a decade. That dog never left them, Agent Rodriguez said with obvious emotion. He stayed with Jake and Amy for 12 years, protecting their remains and waiting for someone to find them. The investigation into who had killed the Morrisons led to a breakthrough when DNA evidence from the crime scene was matched to a convicted felon named Carl Patterson, who had been arrested in 2015 for a string of armed robberies in Colorado. Patterson, when confronted with the evidence, eventually confessed to the murders. He had been hiding in the wilderness in 2011, evading police after a botched bank robbery. When he encountered Jake and Amy at their campsite, he had forced them at gunpoint to lead him to a more remote location, intending to steal their equipment and leave them stranded. "I never meant to kill them," Patterson claimed during his confession. But they kept trying to fight back, and things got out of hand. Patterson had abandoned the bodies in the canyon and taken what supplies he could carry, never knowing that Max had followed them and would spend the next 12 years guarding the site. The dog's loyalty and survival instincts had preserved the crime scene and ultimately led to justice for his owners. Max's story became an international sensation, highlighting the incredible bond between humans and their canine companions. Despite his advanced age and the trauma he had endured, Max was healthy enough to live out his remaining years in comfort. Jake's brother, David Morrison, adopted Max and provided him with the loving home he deserved after his years of wilderness survival. "Max brought our family closure," David said. "He never gave up on Jake and Amy, and because of his loyalty, we finally have answers." The case led to changes in search and rescue protocols, emphasizing the importance of expanding search areas beyond planned routes and considering the possibility of foul play even in wilderness disappearances. Max lived for 2 more years after leading investigators to his owner's remains, passing away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 17. He was buried next to Jake and Amy Morrison in a ceremony attended by hundreds of people who had been touched by his story. Max was more than just a dog, Amy's mother said at the memorial service. He was a guardian angel who made sure that Jake and Amy's story was finally told. The case of the Morrison murders was officially closed with Carl Patterson's conviction and life sentence. But the real hero of the story was Max, whose 12-year vigil in the wilderness had preserved evidence that might otherwise have been lost forever. His story became a testament to the loyalty and intelligence of dogs, and a reminder that sometimes the most important witnesses to tragedy are the ones who can't speak, until they find a way to lead us to the truth. Max's incredible journey from beloved pet to wilderness survivor to key witness in a murder case showed that love and loyalty can endure even the most impossible circumstances. For 12 years, he had kept his promise to protect Jake and Amy, and in the end, he had kept his word. Sometimes justice takes more than a decade to arrive, and sometimes it comes in the form of a faithful dog who never forgot his duty to the people he loved most in the world. The wilderness of Colorado had kept its secret for 12 years, but Max had kept vigil even longer, waiting patiently for the day when he could finally lead someone back to where his story began, and where Jake and Amy Morrison's story could finally end with the justice they deserved. Don't forget to like the videos and subscribe to the channel for more short stories.